This episode of the Everything Matters podcast is brought to you by BeLegendary.coach, where we transform leaders into legends. Are you a senior leader, entrepreneur, or executive looking to take your leadership to the next level? Are you dealing with things such as imposter syndrome, concerns with whether or not your leadership is lingering long after you've completed face time? Looking for new and innovative ways to connect with your team and to gain buy-in from stakeholders that you deal with on a daily basis? If any of this sounds like something that you're dealing with and you would like to take your leadership to an extraordinary level, your effectiveness to a legendary level, visit BeLegendary.coach. That's www.belegendary.coach and schedule your free performance analysis today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Everything Matters podcast, the next episode. My name is Bradford Speaks. I'm your host, also the founder and CEO of BeLegendary.coach, a performance effectiveness and leadership development company. Today's guest on the podcast is a gentleman by the name of Steve Kahan. Steve is an author. He's also an entrepreneur. Steve is here to talk about how he took a company from about $6 million in annual revenue to over $145 million in 5 years and achieved a $1.4 billion exit. Steve is also working in the capacity of an advisor to the American University in Kiev, where he's helping them to develop an accelerator for startups that will help to revive the Ukrainian economy, barring nothing really, really terrible happens. And our prayers are with everyone in Ukraine. Steve is an accomplished author who recently published a book called High Velocity Digital Marketing. In his spare time, if you want to call it that, Steve is working on a murder mystery novel with Jazzy McKenzie, who's also partnered with James Patterson, the legendary murder mystery novelist. So please join me in welcoming Steve Kahan to the Everything Matters podcast. Let's get it popping. Steve Kahan, welcome, sir, to the Everything Matters podcast. So grateful to have you on the show today and excited about what you're going to share. So appreciate you really being here, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I got to call the white elephant out in the room, and it's this Astros hat that you're wearing. You know, everybody knows the Astros won the World Series, blah, the Braves got kicked out, blah, 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 blah. So I got to give you congratulations. Great job on winning. I did watch several of the games in the series, and Astros were hot this year, man. They kicked butt. I mean, they tore the Phillies a new one, man. So congratulations on bringing home the World Series. How long have you been an Astros fan?
For 20 years, and I guess I had the opportunity to go to one of the World Series games, but what I was really happy was that the Astros were able to win one for Dusty Baker, which was huge.
I know, man.
Just given the fact that he had never won a World Series before. So that was awesome.
That was really awesome. I totally agree. I was reading about that and I had no idea. I thought he won one with the Dodgers like when I was a kid. Because I remember, I'm telling my age here, but I remember my dad would watch them play when he was a player. And I was like a big fan of Dusty Baker. I'd be playing outside with my friends and I would say, man, I'm Dusty Baker up the bat right now, baby. I'm Dusty Baker. So to see him coaching, I couldn't believe that he didn't have a World Series. I think he has like 5 or 6 like division championships, right? But no World Series championships. It's crazy.
Yeah. So that was really awesome to see. And really, I couldn't have been happier for him.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm so happy for him too, man. So again, congratulations to the Astros. Y'all played lights out this year, man. So we'll see what next year looks like. We're excited about that as well. Cool beans. All right, man. So again, I want to talk about, Steve, some of the great stuff that you're doing with helping business. And I think that that one of the things that's really excited me when I was reading your resume is how you grew your own company from $6 million up to $145 million company in 5 years and achieved a $1.4 billion, that's with the B, dollar exit on that particular venture. Please tell us, what kind of business was this that you were able to scale this way? How did you get into it? And man, how do you make that kind of a growth right there? How does that happen?
Yeah, it was a hell of a ride. It was a company with a really sort of funny name by the name of Thycotic. I know it sounds a little bit like psychotic in the cybersecurity space, but it wasn't exactly a success on day one. So when I joined, the company was about 5 million in revenue. Okay. And there was 2 quarters in a row where revenue had flatlined. The sales force was really in disarray. We had no partners. We had no system to manage all of our sales leads. Marketing was going to 50 trade shows a year. And so this company with a bright future, it seemed that its outlook was a little bit in jeopardy. But we restored revenue growth the very first quarter. We hit our numbers every quarter for 5 years in a row, and then ultimately grew from the number that you mentioned to 145 million in that 5 years, and achieved that $1.4 billion exit.
Outstanding. That's really incredible. I mean, you rarely see that kind of growth with any company, especially in such a small window of 5 years. So I get that it didn't happen overnight, and I know there was a lot of work. So when you talk about revenue was sort of flatline, right? I'd love to talk about, like, what did you do? What strategies did y'all put in place for the sales organizations? What kind of systems did you put in place to really help stabilize that and help that revenue stream go from flat to actually starting to rise? What happened?
Well, I'll tell you how it started literally on day one. So I interviewed the founders and what was the management team at the time. And I asked them who the company's target customers were. And they said, well, Steve, come on, we're a cybersecurity company. You ought to know. We're focused on the VP of IT security, or the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And so I shook my head and said, got it. And then I started to interview a number of those customers and talk with them. And what I came to find out was that although the company was 5 million in revenue, that their customer actually wasn't those VPs of IT security. It was the IT admins who were the techies in the trenches who actually were responsible for security as well. They wore many hats. Wow. And what we did was we secured passwords across the infrastructure, like operating systems, databases, applications. All of those have passwords. And so if someone got their hands on those passwords, they can do really bad stuff because they'd have the keys to the kingdom. Right. And so once I found out who the customer actually was, there were some very specific things about them. For example, they wanted super fast, super easy, super affordable. They really didn't want to deal with consultants. They were never going to read an analyst report, but they would read reports from their peers and reviews and things of that nature. And so imagine if I was going to put a marketing strategy in place targeted to the wrong customer, that there would be no way that we actually would have been able to turn that growth and sustain that growth for any length of time. So it really started with identifying the customers and understanding the full context of their world, which really set the stage for a successful marketing program.
Wow. I mean, really, really brilliant to go in there and not just, because I think a lot of people that come in as consultants, sometimes you'll take what the stakeholder that you're talking to, you sort of take their word. And I think it's brilliant that you actually say, okay, I got it. And you said, let me go talk to some other people and see what's really going on in here. You pulled back the hood and saw something completely different than what you were told on the outside. How often do you find in the work that you've done with businesses, Steve, that's actually going on, that people don't know, they aren't clear about who their ideal customer is? How often does that happen?
So often you just can't believe it, right? And part of the reason for that is that oftentimes organizations aren't talking to their customers enough, right? And so not only are they not talking to their customers enough, but when they are, a lot of times they're asking them the wrong questions. So for example, a lot of times what you'll find is that entrepreneurs might ask leading questions because the answers then will happen to align with the products or services that they're selling.
Sure.
And of course, that never works. And so I really spent a lot of time asking questions. Let me give you an example of one category that most organizations don't even think about asking. So I would always ask questions around the status quo. And so the status quo really represents their current situation. It's how they conduct business now. And that really matters because a lot of times you don't lose business to a competitor. You lose business to the status quo when someone says, well, gee, what I have right now is really good enough, right? And so I'm really not going to look for a solution. So I'd ask questions like, tell me your current process for fill in the blank for your business. In our case, it was privilege access management. So describe your current process for privilege access management. What works? What doesn't? What were your operations for handling the management of passwords? How does your team stay on top of it and not get overwhelmed by it? And what are some of the tools that you currently use to manage those? And what do you like about them? What don't you like, right? And so those are examples of real questions that someone could ask their customers that will really help to reveal what about the current situation that is existing within their customer's environment that is the reason why they might not be looking at their solutions. And then you could get into their challenges, the benefits that they hope to achieve, and then finally the impact of those benefits, which is really what's so meaningful. And then what's so important is when you're asking the right questions is that you capture that information and really reflect what the buyers are actually saying back at them. Because interestingly, a lot of organizations think that like, gee, if our marketing department was like super clever and came up with clever ways to communicate that is really what matters, but it really doesn't. What matters is that you really understand what your customers are saying because they want to work with organizations and people who understand them, who empathize with them. And speaking their language proves that you do that.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more. So when you came to work with Thycotic, were you coming in as a business partner or were you coming in as a consultant? What was your role as you looked in and began to analyze what they were doing and help them put a strategy in place that drove that kind of success? What capacity were you coming on as?
So when I came, it was when a venture capital company invested some money and they hired myself and another person to come in. My primary area of expertise is marketing and digital marketing specifically. And so I was the chief marketing officer, but then also ran operations for the business. So I was an employee, right? And so I was in the trenches doing the work, and it's the way I love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So before you came to work with and for Thycotic to help them do what you did with them, what was your background in like a cybersecurity space, or were you like, what's your background? Like, how did you get into, sales, marketing in that particular area? What's your background, education, experience, and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll take you way back. So I remember when I was growing up, my father used to tell me so many times, he'd say, Steve, look, just work hard, work your tail off, get a job at a big corporation. If you work hard, they'll take care of you and you will have a great career.
Yeah.
And so I listened to what my father would tell me so many times, and that's exactly what I did. So I went to school, got a communications background. And then, of course, that really didn't prepare me for much of anything. So I took a job at a large corporation processing claims.
Okay.
And I remember that I was staring at the pile of claims I had to process one day, and it was this huge pile. And I was looking at my bank statement. I had $50 left in my bank account, and the student loans would grab a hold of my paycheck before I would ever they'd ever even get a chance to,
Right.
like have an impact. And so I remember asking myself an important question at that time, many years ago, and it was, how could I earn a great living loving what I do? And what I always knew about myself is that I was very entrepreneurial. I loved marketing, but I really didn't know anything about it. And I wanted to be around other like-minded entrepreneurs. So I started to look at startups, and I made all the mistakes in the world when I joined my first startup and maybe got a little lucky, but I made the jump to the startup world and never left, sort of got that bug.
Yeah. And what time was that? Like what year was that? Was it during the dot-com period where all these startups were going crazy?
It was like 30 years ago, right? So it was like when marketing, there was no such thing as digital marketing at that time. So I grew up through the various evolutions of marketing, but when I had my chance to join my first startup, I got a chance to do everything because I was the only person in marketing. So it was great, right? And so I just relished that opportunity and took the opportunity to learn and get good mentors. And again, like I say, I never looked back.
That's awesome. Well, thanks to your pops for giving you some what he thought was the best advice, right? And I think that a lot of us in our age group probably got similar advice from our parents, and the world ended up being very different than it was for them. I have this conversation with friends all the time, and it's like, man, must have been nice to have a pension that the company actually put money aside. My mother was a school teacher, and she retired, a long time ago, and her check just keeps rolling in every single month. It's just nice. But we're in a different world now. And some people will have that, but for the most part, companies don't do that anymore. So thanks, Dad, for giving us the great advice. Steve took some of it and he listened. Then he said, okay, I'm going to go this way, Dad. I think this might be a better deal for me. So that's awesome, man. Really great. Awesome stuff, Steve, man. You've really done a really great work in helping small businesses, medium-sized businesses, maybe some large-sized businesses. It sounds like you've also helped in scaling their businesses and helping them grow and really analyze what's going on and help them find the kinks and the bottlenecks in their operations and get things off the ground where they want to go. So I know you're doing some work, and you've done some work and maybe doing some work right now with some venture capitalists helping other companies. What else are you doing with your time right now? How do you spend your days? What do you do right now? I know you wrote a book and you're doing some consulting and mentorship. Give us a sense of what your days look like. How, where are you making a contribution to help others?
Yeah. So for me, I'm writing a couple of books. I have my new book, High Velocity Digital Marketing, launches here shortly. And I'm working with a number of companies to help them to grow at reasonable cost, which is a lot of fun for me because it really gets me the chance to work with a lot of entrepreneurs who want to achieve success, and I like to pay it forward and to help them by giving them some expert advice. And then I'm also doing quite a bit of philanthropy. For example, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm working with the American University of Kyiv in the Ukraine, and they are building a startup accelerator. It's incredible. Like sometimes when I talk with them and there's like bad stuff going on around them, some of which I could see, and it's just these people are so brave, and what they're going through is just unimaginable, and yet. Here they are. Their university opened on time. They're doing classes. I'm actually speaking with one of their classes coming up here shortly. But they want to build a startup accelerator because they view that they have a central role in helping the entrepreneurs in the Ukraine bring back the Ukrainian economy. And so helping them to do that is something that I'm really enjoying, and I'm hoping that they all make it through this just terrible situation that they find themselves in.
Yeah, that's really tough. Yeah, I agree. And I certainly thank you for the work that you're doing to help them over there and help them build their economy and strengthen the area over there. It's really cool that you have the opportunity to do that work. So how did that opportunity come about to be able to work with that group over there and doing that?
I mean, sometimes it's just happenstance luck in a way. So
Yeah.
I happened to give a TED talk with a professor here who is Ukrainian, that was one of the founding proctors of the American University of Kyiv. And he asked me to be involved. And of course, I agreed to do that. And we meet all the time. And it's incredible when he's out there and traveling to and from the States and some of the things that he has to go through. But he's a very brave person. He's part advising President Zelensky personally. And
cool.
And gee, if I can help in any way, that's something that I just would get great satisfaction in doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like, Steve, just in conversations that we talked a little bit off camera and just listen to the conversation that we're having right now, it sounds to me like you're giving back and you're being a contribution to other people, maybe even to other countries and governments and things like that is really important to you. Why is that something that inspires you? Like, what drives your willingness and your desire to want to give back and to pay it forward, as you say?
Well, because I think any person who has achieved success, whether they admit it or not, they got help getting to where they are in their lives. And I have, right? And I specifically looked for mentors, and I've had a number over the years that were so gracious to help me. I've worked with some incredibly talented people over the years. And because of that, I feel an obligation that it's incumbent on me to help others to learn what I've been able to learn and hopefully help them to avoid some of the trial and error approach and to sort of straight away navigate towards success personally, professionally, and financially.
Excellent. So Steve, if you had if say some small business owner or medium-sized business owners out there listening to the podcast today, and they've kind of they're at a standstill right now. They're sort of stagnant and they're trying to figure out what's going on. What would the process look like for them if they wanted to, say, hey, Steve, would you help me get my business going? I might be one of those people. I don't, who knows? But if they did that, what would the process look like? And I know it may be different based on the industry and what they actually do and things like that. But, just if you could give us a general overview of what that process would look like, where would it start and how would you take that on?
Well, so, first I would just say is that, people should just ask, right? I mean, so sometimes is that if a well-written, thoughtful note on LinkedIn Messenger gets through and gets people to respond.
Very true.
But what I found is that there was a recent McKinsey survey that I read where 83% of CEOs expect their marketing to drive most of their company's growth. And yet there was a study done in the Harvard Business Review that said about the same number of CEOs are dissatisfied with the return on their marketing investments. And so, you look at that and so many sales and marketing leaders, they feel overwhelmed by trying to hit revenue expectations that they can't meet. Yeah. And what I've learned over the years and what I've gained a great deal of expertise in is that the way people buy today has totally changed. And yet the way organizations sell and market really hasn't enough. And let me give you an example of that. So like if you were going to go buy a car, right, you're probably not going to go to 10 different dealers to talk with the sales representatives at those 10 dealerships. Nothing against the salespeople. I'm sure they're good, knowledgeable people. Yes. But that, you're going to go online. You're going to go do some research. You're going to read reviews. You might go build a car at one of those sites. You're going to know how much that car should cost. You'll probably know as much about that car as the sales rep does. And so buyers now rely on digital content to make purchase decisions. they don't rely on the sales reps necessarily for the majority of their buyer's journey when they're going to make a decision. And so this new level of information parity in the buying process has totally changed the way marketers need to interact with their potential buyers to influence them towards their products and services.
That's so true. So true. I mean, I work for a social media company as a sales effectiveness coach, and I do high performance coaching as well to senior leaders and executives. And you're spot on. Even social media in itself it's not just posting a tweet or a picture or pictograph or something about your brand or about your product. I mean, it's literally the way that you connect with your customers. It's how they engage with your brand, and it's a selling tool. It's not just a marketing tool. It's actually a sales tool, right?
100%. And let me give you an example. So if you think about the scenario where I talked about my last company's Thycotic, that our ideal target buyer was the IT admins.
Right.
So we had some really great cybersecurity people who were just top notch, much smarter than me, and so they wanted to launch a podcast. And so the last thing I wanted to do was to launch a podcast that like nobody listens to, but we feel good about it because we could check the box. Check, we did a podcast.
Right.
And so what I did was I knew who our buyer was, and I wanted to then figure out, okay, where do they hang out online? And what I learned was that a lot of those IT admins are being trained by an organization called Cybrary. And so what I did was we partnered with Cybrary, who already had thousands of these IT admins from around the globe as customers. They did a number of podcasts, but nothing in cybersecurity.
Okay.
We talked to them about the idea of doing a podcast that we would do together. And so literally overnight, we had one of the largest listened to cybersecurity podcasts because we partnered with an organization that already had access to the buyers, the customers that we wanted to communicate with. And so just taking some perspectives like that enabled us to really launch a great podcast. And then, of course, how we had specific calls to action that would then guide those listeners towards our company, and by adding value and not being too markety, if you will, but really adding value for free. That enabled us to create a relationship with them digitally in ways that our competitors didn't and never could.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is that developing strategic partnerships is really, really important. And, there's a lot of co-branding and cross-branding that happens with certain companies that can benefit one another. So being able to go in and have a conversation, you being able to speak their language, understanding what their goals are, their objectives are, and then seeing that it's a match and a marry for, hey, we can help you guys do this, and maybe we can, put something on your guys' platform and we can form some kind of a strategic partnership, which I see that happening a lot these days, because I think everyone's starting to see, not everyone, but a lot of people are starting to see that you don't really lose as much as you thought you would by forming a strategic partnership. You actually gain a lot more when you do that. There's a lot more to go around. So it sounds like that's what you're saying. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, it is. And even, again, staying with that example, one of the things that we always did was we continually grew our website traffic month over month. But the key is that our website visitor to lead conversion rate was always over 5%. And that was a benchmark for me. And so one of the absolute critical success factors to making that happen, as I mentioned, is that the digital content is what the potential audience or our buyers were looking for. And so you've got to have great content across the full spectrum of the buyer's journey, no matter where that buyer is.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the pieces of content, and I learned that this would be really successful by interviewing the customers, was that if you ask those IT admins, in their case being responsible for managing the passwords across their infrastructure known as privileged passwords,
Mm-hmm.
if you ask them, how many privileged passwords does your organization actually have? Like 100% of them had no idea, right? And that's because these environments are very complex and always changing.
Yeah, very much
So in our paid for tool, we had a discovery function that would go find those passwords. And so what I decided to do was we would give away that discovery function for free. And then we would target it to specific environments like a Microsoft or a Unix.
Mm-hmm.
Our potential buyers would download it, get that discovery, and then they get this beautiful report that would say, gee, here's the privileged passwords you now have. Here are the risks associated with that. And then here is what you would do to go remedy that. Now, of course, they didn't want to do that manually.
Right.
But then also, so that just flew off the shelves. And think about what that means. How often in your life, I could tell you if it's me, it's like next to zero. Do you give up your name, address, email, and phone number online, right? It's like almost never, right? So the content has to be so good that you're actually willing to do that. But that was an example of content that we discovered as a result of talking with our customers that would be so good that we would get huge response.
Right.
And then we would train up our sales organization so they weren't responding like pushy salespeople and saying, like just trying to sell. They could follow up in a consultative manner and say, gee, so how did you do? Where did you do well? Where didn't you do well? Would you be interested in how we might help? Which then totally changed the dynamic of the perceived relationship between our company and that potential buyer, where it was built more on the basis of trust because we were just simply trying to help, which was true. So we try to have great content that people coveted and then earn the right to do business with them. Mm-hmm. And that's an example of how you could really build a high velocity digital approach towards your sales and marketing.
Yeah. I was thinking about as you were talking earlier, and I wanted to point to it. That's the buying process. When you talked about, buying a car and how when you go buy a car, just as much, if not more than the sales rep, because there's a lot of churn in the car sales industry anyway. So most times you go in there, the person's been there for 6 months or less. Right. So there's so much information that you have. And so the salesperson does need to be prepared and armed and trained and developed in a way that they can deal with these highly educated customers, because hardly anybody comes in there knowing nothing anymore. Like that doesn't exist anymore. They've done some kind of research online and they're very, very well aware of what you have, what the features and benefits are. And it's your job now as a salesperson, the onus is on you to sell them and to find the value that's going to make them actually make a buying decision. And I would imagine that the content creation that you're talking about is a big part of that. What's it gonna take that's going to be so attractive to that person who's online that they're willing to give up their personal information? Because I'm like you, for me to give up, like I may give up my name and an email, maybe. And it's probably going to be an email that I don't really want you to email me at. If you right. But for me to give you, if it's really valuable, I'm like, you know what? I really want to be on their mailing list because this is something really I think will be useful for me. I'll give up my information, including my phone number. So that I think for a company, even if you have a landing page, like for a company, you build a funnel landing page, right? And someone lands there, what's going to make them divulge their personal information just to be on your mailing, to get your newsletter, whatever it might be? Everybody's trying to get everybody's email addresses to be on their newsletter. What do you offer that's different? And sounds like that's what you help them to sort of.
Yeah, exactly. And like a question I'm always asked is, so they hear about some of the incredible content that our company always was able to come up with and deliver. And I came up with some of those ideas, but I'm always asked like, well, how do we come up with great ideas for our company?
Yeah.
And so for your listeners, this is how I did it, was that I would get together, in our case, it was cybersecurity. And so I would get together with some of the best and brightest in R&D, in like sales engineers. This is the more technical side of sales, professional services. And I would invite those people twice a year. I would send them links, whether it was inside our industry or outside, to incredible content, incredible free tools. And I would ask them to each come with one great idea that they think our buyers would love. And so we would convene as a team. We would talk about the ideas. We would prioritize them. A lot of times then you got to go build it. And so I had a built-in team of people that were motivated and excited to help me to go build that content. And then for the rest of the company, once we ultimately delivered it, I had the best and the brightest who were the biggest cheerleaders promoting it to all the rest of the people of how great that stuff was.
Yes.
And so that was really how I've always had more than our fair share of great ideas. It was because I involved many other smart people in helping me come up with it. And then I would pay them. So if they had great ideas that we would deliver before I would allocate marketing budget to other stuff, it's here's a bonus for this. Hey, you helped to deliver it. That would be the first place I would spend budget, because I knew that was the absolute key to success.
Absolutely. So let's say a small business, right? They have a marketing budget of say $50,000 to $100,000, and they're looking to again scale their business and take it to the next level. Would that be something that you could maybe work with? I mean, is that a budget that you could work within, something like that? I mean, I know there's other factors to consider, that industry and things like that, the vertical, but is that something that's doable?
I mean, it depends, like the situation, right? I mean, obviously you'd have to get into more detail, but one of the things, like, here's something that people could do for next to free, right? And so whenever someone goes to buy something, odds are they're going to go to Google, right? You're going to Google something, right? So you've got to be great on Google. So there are books that are like 500 pages long on what's known as SEO, search engine optimization, or really how to become great on Google. And then you could talk to some SEO experts and your head will be spinning because you don't understand a lot of the technical, they're geeking it out. Like, it's hard to really figure out what the heck they're talking about. So we always punched far above our weight in terms of our results. And here's how we did that. So the first thing that we did in talking to our customers is that we understood the words and the phrases that they would be searching on when they would be looking for solutions. And then, of course, there are tools you could use to get more quantification around that, so that you could see what are the exact number of searches. Gotcha. So we had this list of what we called our coveted keywords that we would have, and we always wanted to rank as high as we could for those. So whenever we were creating content, whether it's content like I had mentioned or website content, whatever it was, blogs, we would have our SEO expert meet with that content creator to discuss the keywords that should go in that content. Then when that content was about ready to be delivered, they would review it once more to make sure we weren't missing some great opportunities.
Gotcha.
And then we would make sure that that content was properly exposed so that Google could scan it, right? And so just simply by implementing that process, and then of course our partners loved our content, so then we had a ton of backlinks. Just implementing that just simple process over time will do more to positively impact your rankings on Google than you could ever possibly imagine.
Wow. So ranking on Google, you got to learn how to, and that's something that you could do on a pretty small budget, is maybe hire somebody to come in and, hey, help me SEO my products, whatever services, whatever I'm doing. That's a big deal.
Right. I mean, sometimes there's people that are managing a website and they might be doing all the right things in terms of all the technical stuff that you do to rank highly. But like that process, if you just implement a process like I had described, and you happen to have a website that's built properly, for example, that's not leading to 404 errors or missing stuff like that, that is a way that you could become great on Google. And of course, I cover several other things in the High Velocity Digital Marketing book.
That's awesome. Really, really awesome, man. It sounds like it. So great segue to the book. I know you mentioned it earlier, and I want to talk more about that. When is the book scheduled to come out? I know you said earlier that it's going to be coming out really soon. When is that scheduled to come out? And give us an overview of what readers can expect to get out of that book. I mean, you've given a ton of value just in the interview so far. What can people expect when they open up that book and dive into it?
They're going to get a digital marketing master class, basically. And let me tell you what they won't get before I'll tell you what they will get.
All right.
What they won't get is a bunch of theoretical stuff that sounds good, but is not implementable. So that's just not who I am. Right. And so
love that.
you can't be a startup person and love to just pontificate on theory. Right.
No.
And so the book is very much a how-to. So whether it's how to become great in Google or how, like all the questions when I would interview customers to go figure out the entire context of their world, or how to create a great marketing campaign that produces results at reasonable cost, or what you should do and what you should look at in terms of building a high-performing website. Things like that are in the book and more, even as it relates to if you're going to seminars or events, how to sort of take a high-velocity approach to that, or even public relations for that matter. And so it's really, when you're in the startup world, everything has to contribute to pipeline and revenue, right? Because you just don't have a lot of money to throw around.
Right.
And that's really what the book is. So people get a master class, but what they'll get more than anything is they'll get a lot of really great ideas around things they could do to improve their company's revenue growth.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I love the idea of, you said having things that are implementable right away. And I'm all about that. Like if I can read something really quick, grab a little tool I can start, and I can do it myself, love it. For someone who's got a small budget and you get these quick tips that you can do, and it may bring in a couple $1,000s in revenue, just that one trick, right? And it's worth it. So I love the value that you're talking about the book's going to bring. So when is the book going to be available, and where can people find it, or how can they get on the waiting list?
Yeah. It's available for pre-order now. It actually, I've been told by the publisher, it should launch on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list.
Okay. Nice.
And it's available wherever you would buy books online. So Amazon, etc.
Gotcha. And what's the title of it again, Steve?
High Velocity Digital Marketing.
High Velocity Digital Marketing. And for everybody out there listening, we all know how critical digital marketing is. I own a coaching company, and I'm going through a whole learning process myself of digital marketing and what it means to really have the right copy, speaking, like Steve was saying earlier, what you're saying is speaking to your ideal customer, that when they hear it, it's like their language, like singing to their ears, music to their ears. And that's what you want to have your ads dialed in to do. And it sounds like, Steve, they're going to be able to find things like that right there in that book.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I love it, man. Love it. So, Steve, one of the neat questions that I really like to get people who have been highly successful to talk about here on the Everything Matters podcast is failure. There's no way you can own a business, start a business, run a business where you're not going to have areas that you fail in. And oftentimes people say, well, Bradford, I don't really see anything as failure. And okay, I get that. It theoretically sounds great, but we all deal with failure and what the impact of that is. So I'd love to hear about one of your biggest failures, that you would consider one of your biggest failures, and how you were able to pull yourself out of that and get on moving to the next task and achieving your goals.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into the failure in an area that might catch you a little bit by surprise. So I've been blessed that I've been married over 30 years and have 2 grandkids. But
Awesome.
when I started my career, I always was sort of like a type A workaholic, right?
Gotcha.
And what I learned was that like work-life balance wasn't exactly very balanced, right? And that was a failing of mine early in my career for sure. And the problem is that like home was was always the place where I would make sacrifices. But then I was lucky enough early on to have met a mentor that taught me something that was hugely valuable that I implemented and I still implement to this day to correct that failure, which is so many people, certainly I did, live by their calendar, right? And so like if you open up your calendar right now, like do you have like back-to-back meetings, right? And so
let's see here. Yeah, I do.
And so what I learned was that you've got to protect your calendar. And part of protecting your calendar is proactively building in, for example, if you want to be home for dinner, right, or breakfast with your family, build it into your calendar. If you want to go work out for lunch, build it into your calendar. If you want to have more time to think strategically or to learn some new stuff, build it into your calendar. And so what I learned early on was to be very much of a defender of my own calendar, to not get sort of into, mindless meetings where, there was really questionable benefit to me as well as to the person that called the meeting themselves. And to make sure that you proactively build good work-life harmony, realizing that sometimes it's never going to be perfect and not getting stressed out by it if you got to violate it a time or two. But just that simple lesson that I learned changed things around for me and moved sort of a person that was out of balance into balance and helped me to fix a failure that needed to be fixed many, many years ago.
Got that, man. And I'm sure your wife is ecstatic that you got that worked out and she has more of you. And, one of the words that you mentioned earlier, and I think I read this in your bio, that you use the word harmony instead of balance. And I like that. And I started adopting that after I read your bio, because I often try to find this balance. And like you said, there's no perfection. There's no perfect balance, right? But if you can create harmony, I really, really like that. Really resonated with me, because that means that things are working, right? So whatever, it just works, right? It just works. Like your spouse or your family, they get what they need from you. Your business get what it needs from you. Your job, whatever, and the people that matter in your life, everybody gets what they need. So you have this harmony that works. It's like a perfect tune that's balanced together, right? And I love that.
I love that word. I mean, I'm not huge work-life balance. I mean, I of course I mentioned that, but I do like the term work-life harmony because it's always ebbs and flows. And I think if you view it as like a balance, then there's a good or a bad, a right or a wrong. And the world doesn't exist that way. The world exists in shades of gray, and it's okay. Right. And so like, don't get too stressed out by it. Realize that it is actually harmony, and that like, if things on either front are not going good, it affects both, right? They're interdependent. True. And so having good harmony means that like the whole actually is lifted up and better.
Yes. Agreed. And I think that, you said that, about time blocking, essentially, is what you're talking about, with managing your calendar at a high level. And that's something that I haven't always been great at. But over the last few years, I've really taken that on as a big, important objective for me, is to get my calendar and block my time out, no matter what it is. And then on top of that, in addition to having the time blocked out for things that are important, you have to have integrity around that, right? You got to honor your word. Like if you say, hey, honey, I'm taking you out to dinner at 7:00 on Thursday, then you need to be ready at 6:45 to roll out, or 6:30, whatever. And just honor your word, like be your word, like do what you say you're going to do to yourself and to all the people that matter to your life and all the things that you have going on. I think that's a really important part of it as well.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer that that when people could count on you, right?
Yes.
Whether that's work,
Yes.
whether that's home, but it's
Right.
like it's rock solid. Like there's never a question, which comes down to trust. It comes down to things like commitment, and
Absolutely.
and then just being strong in those areas are areas then that contribute to high integrity, right? And for me, that's just an important part of it.
Yeah. Big time. Big time. So married for 30 years, I'm gonna guess, Steve, that you've got maybe a couple kids here, one or two or three. You know, how many kids do you have, and how do you enjoy being a dad, and how did you manage to hold everything together and keep that harmony with family life and running a business and things like that?
Well, I do have two kids. As I mentioned, I have two grandkids. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I love my family, right? And so for me, it's an overused term, family first, but it's for me, it is. And my family, the way I view it is that they're also sort of like not only family, but they're like best friends. They are the people that I want to hang out with.
Right.
So, for example, when we went to a World Series game, I made sure my family was with me, right? Because I
There you
wanted
go.
them to have the experience of,
Yes.
yeah, it's a baseball game, but the crowd is incredible, right? And just to see what that's all like, to hear it, to feel it, right? And so for me, it's always been about that. That was instilled in me. It's part of my DNA. I'm sure from my parents and many
Mm-hmm.
generations before that. But I think that for people who sort of put that perspective front and center in their lives, they'll have a richer life.
You mentioned mentor earlier. Like, who is your biggest inspiration? If you could point to one person, one thing, maybe it's a couple of people, who would you say are your biggest inspirations?
I have like so many of them, but like I'll just even give, there was one that I work for, a mentor, CEO, right? And so what I'll never forget about him was that this company was his family, and he got families, not just the employees, but the families of employees. If there was a function in the company, family members were invited to go too, right? And they were honored, right? And so they were put front and center, right? And
Nice.
so it was sort of how he lived his life, how he treated really everyone as sort of family, quite frankly, but also how he viewed startups, right? And so he viewed startups in many ways as like not like the traditional definition like that you might get from the Small Business Association. It was more like, it's like he would say that a startup is like the last frontier for outlaws, like a place where nonconformists could live, create, and sell their ideas. And to me, I always felt like, how cool. I mean, who doesn't want to be involved in that? Like a place where you get to be sort of the rough riding rebel running circles around the slower bureaucratic battleships. And he created that environment, and yet that environment, which was very fast paced, highly accountable, right? Very passionate, but it also blended in that concept of family. And he was one mentor that like you might hear about that about certain companies, but I actually lived it and saw it. And a great example of that is that company successfully sold probably like 15, 18 years ago, somewhere around there. And still, many people from that company get together at annual reunion parties and talk about what an incredible journey, right? And so the fact that like that still happens, like that never happens, right? And so, but that all came back to, in my view, that one leader who had the company that way. And he really rubbed off on everyone, but certainly me. I learned a lot from him.
That's outstanding, man. I've was an athlete for years, and I had a couple of coaches that you just would do anything for, right? And I've worked for a couple of leaders in my professional career too that are like that. It just makes the company, and it makes it so special to be there, and to have people want to get
one day felt like work.
Right. I mean, it's like you just want to be there. You want to be around it. You love the people that you work with, and having a leader who gives you the freedom and the flexibility to create, and he appreciates that. You can't work in a better environment. That's so awesome, man. So awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So I know you're, in addition to writing your own book right now, you're also co-writing a book with a pretty well-known author that I think most people that are listening to this podcast knows who it is. Tell us about that particular project that you've got going on right now.
Yeah. So I am actually writing a murder mystery right now that I've conceived, wrote the detail outline, and I'm doing it with two of James Patterson co-authors, right? And so in the case of James Patterson, he doesn't write a lot, like he writes with and through co-authors. Gotcha. And so that process of writing with these incredibly talented people is so much fun, because you're being like super creative and mischievous, if you will, and using your brain in ways that I've never quite used in the business world. And so it's about almost halfway through, but it's incredibly fulfilling.
Are all his books murder mysteries, sort of? Are they on?
They are. They're thrillers, right? And this one is too. And hopefully someday it'll be on the bookshelves.
Man, that's awesome. And you know what? Sometimes these books get adopted into TV shows and murder. You never know where it can go, man. So all the best on that particular venture. That should be a lot of fun. Sounds like you're enjoying it.
Thank you.
Outstanding. All right. This has been an incredible interview. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us, man, so far. We know where to get the book. We'll be looking out for the murder mystery coming up. And if someone, I know, right? If someone wants to contact you to just have a conversation about how you can maybe help them in scaling their business and, analyzing what they've got going on and helping them to take things to the next level, where could people contact if they want to reach out?
They could contact me on my website, which is beastartupsuperstar.com.
Beastartupsuperstar.com. I love it, man. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Is there anything else that you didn't talk about today, Steve, that you want to share with the audience? Anything that we didn't cover? I want to make sure you got everything out that you want to share.
Astros in 2023.
Oh my God. Astros in 2033. We're going to see about that, buddy. I don't know. We're going to see about that, man. But again, congratulations on the World Series, man. All the best to you, Steve. Thanks so much for coming on the Everything Matters podcast and sharing all the great work you're doing. Continue to be a stand for the small guy, man. I love what you're doing with helping small businesses take their performance to the next level. And I'm going to reach out to you. I'm going to go to the website and shoot you my information as well and talk. And I'll set up a conversation so we can talk about how I can scale my ventures that I got going on too. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Steve. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now.
This is Doris Brown's baby boy. We out.